In a public forum a few years ago, longtime resident and former executive director Mike Loso described the Wrangell Mountains Center as a sinking ship. Myself and many other local supporters have found this to be an extremely accurate metaphor. The Wrangell Mountains Center is indeed a sinking ship, and it has been for a very long time. In fact, it's been a sinking ship so long that most people that I talk to seem to assume that the Wrangell Mountains Center can do no better. The failure is the natural state of the organization, and that the best we can hope for is that the organization simply stays afloat. In this video, I hope to dispel some of the common myths that perpetuate the false notion that the organization can do no better than to merely survive. My name is John Erdman, and I live in McCarthy year-round and recently stepped down after nearly 5 years as the Wrangell Mountains Center's executive director. Myth number 1, the Wrangell Mountains Center is just really hard to run. As the myth goes, the Wrangell Mountains Center has been a mess because it's just really difficult to manage an organization in a wilderness setting like McCarthy. How can anyone possibly succeed out here? It's just too hard. But of course, many businesses and organizations do succeed in McCarthy, organizations that are in fact far more complicated and difficult to run than the Wrangell Mountains Center. I worked for one such local McCarthy business in a general management capacity for 5 summers prior to joining the Wrangell Mountains Center. Running a business or organization in McCarthy is more difficult, to be sure, than many other places, but success is possible out here. One of the most immediate and obvious problems for the Wrangell Mountains Center is that the board is Anchorage-based and refuses to invest in consistent staffing on the ground. There is an incredible and indeed alarming amount of turnover at the staff level, resulting in staff having to constantly reinvent the wheel. By contrast, as locals out here know very well, successful organizations in this remote wilderness-based environment invest in their staff leadership and do everything they possibly can to maintain a consistent leadership team summer after summer that is familiar with addressing the unique problems, risks, and challenges that this place presents. Myth number 2, there's no revenue, there's no money. Many people believe that while there may be money out here in McCarthy for local tourist businesses that sell French fries and flight seeing, tangible things that visitors value, there's just no money out here for a nonprofit like the Wrangell Mountains Center. But in fact, what I found, there's a large demand for academic programs and for hosting education groups. The board is simply not able to tap into the myriad revenue opportunities that exist. Tapping into this revenue potential is a professional skill. I have that skill set from decades of business and accounting experience, but prior staff have also had that skill. My point is that not only is the board themselves not competent to tap into the revenue potential, but they have proved unwilling and or unable to retain the skilled professional staff who can do so. An instructive example of all of this is the Juneau Icefield Research Program, or JERP for short. JERP has a very similar field studies program as the Wrangell Mountains Center, and while the Wrangell Mountains Center has always struggled to recruit students or simply to run the program, JERP turns down over 100 students each year. The Wrangell Mountains Center Field Studies program should be at the same level as JERP. What I've found is that people want to participate in our programs. The revenue's there. We simply do not have a board capable of tapping into that revenue potential or willing to support a professional staff who can do so. Myth number 3, there's not enough time for the board to properly run the organization. It may be true that there's revenue out there, but there's just no time. And many board members themselves, I think, believe this, and they use this as a justification for continued participation on the board despite a long-term record of failure. What I observed at the Wrangell Mountains Center working with the board is a textbook example of what was taught to me as ad hoc management. In a nutshell, this is a downward spiral that occurs when there's no vision, no strategic or financial planning, and the leadership chooses to simply run around putting out fires, thinking that that's all that they can do is run around and put out fires. That's ad hoc management. It's fairly well known that the leadership of the board suffers from a lack of focus. The board, I found, often micromanages trivial matters while allowing crucial, important decisions and critical discussions to lapse for months and sometimes even years at a time. If the board were focused on their fiduciary responsibilities as high-level decision makers, they would find that there is plenty of time. It's just a matter of priorities, and it's a matter of focus. Myth number 4, the board is giving it their best. After working with the board for nearly 5 years, my firsthand experiences did not provide me with evidence that the board was giving it their best. In brief, when I was the executive director, I witnessed board members kind of drifting in and out of participation and interest in the organization. Attendance by board members at board meetings and committee meetings was inconsistent. It was irregular, which meant that I had to constantly backtrack and constantly re-explain things. More often than not, I honestly felt like board members were simply not paying close attention. From my experience, board meetings lacked involved and substantial discussions about the greater vision of the organization. The board was inconsistent and unreliable in following up with basic tasks and action items. Committee chairs, who were typically board members, were unprepared for committee meetings, failing to provide agendas for the meetings with enough advance notice for everybody to really spend time with that. These same committee chairs sometimes allowed their committees to lapse for months on end, and were sometimes so thoroughly neglectful that their committees lapsed completely into dormancy. Over the course of 4.5 years as ED, for example, the programming committee was entirely dormant, heaping a massive amount of extra work on my shoulders. While we all want to assume that the board is giving it their best, my experiences as executive director were otherwise. Myth number 5, the organization has just been going through a tough patch. This is an obvious myth to local supporters who have been around for a few decades because they've seen firsthand that the organization's failure is not a short-term trend. This is a long-term trajectory of decline. This is not to minimize the fact that many people have given much and accomplished much, giving the organization bursts of success or sustaining really awesome programs. And these efforts include board members. Many good things have happened at the Wrangell Mountains Center over the years. I don't want to take anything away from that. But the organization as an organization remains a sinking ship. And one of the reasons for this ongoing decline is that the board pushes out people who can help. Rather than bringing people together, as you have to do in a nonprofit, you have to focus on networking and bringing people together and keeping them close. But rather than bringing people together, this board is divisive, alienating people who have much to offer the organization. The root problem, I believe, is that the organization is broken at a structural level. And until those structural defects are corrected, it will always be a sinking ship, regardless of folks' best intentions. That brings us to myth number 6. The Wrangell Mountains Center is a place-based organization. Well, the organization is currently run remotely by an Anchorage-based board, primarily Anchorage-based. And that board has refused to invest in consistent on-the-ground staffing. Myself and many staff before me have wanted, and this is an important point, myself and many staff before me have wanted to remain with the organization for the long term. But we have been pushed out or otherwise unsupported and alienated. This is a very sad truth, and it has many unfortunate consequences. Because staff are treated as disposable, because staff turnover is so extremely, alarmingly high, there really is no consistent place-based presence at the Wrangell Mountains Center. No one to invest the care and the love that comes from intimately understanding this place. In conclusion, the Wrangell Mountains Center should be thriving. There are no legitimate reasons why this organization should not be flourishing. And that's good news. We need not be a sinking ship. And I'm happy to talk more offline about some of the aforementioned myths and some of the details of that. I feel like in this video, I've barely scratched the surface. But with new board leadership and common sense reforms and reorganizations, the Wrangell Mountains Center would be thriving. That's the subject of my next and last video in this 3-part series. I'm John Erdman, signing off from McCarthy. Stay wild, friends. Stay wild.